We don't have any other guests, so I'm going to restart the recording now. So.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the October Guam Board of Accountancy board meeting. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Present are board members Todd Smith, Jenny Chu, Taling Taitano, and myself, and Executive Director Dave Sanford. So we have the agenda, I guess, on screen. So the next item is approval of last meeting's minutes, which was August 19 meeting. And just to confirm, Dave, there was no September meeting, right?
That's correct. We canceled the September meeting. So this is the August 19 minutes, which is the minutes of the hearing, et cetera, which is why it's kind of long. But I don't know if anybody needs to take a look at it, but it's here if anybody wants to look at it.
I move we accept the minutes.
Thank you, Todd.
Second.
Second by Taling. Thank you.
Yes.
Minutes approved. We'll go ahead and move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the, what do you want to do first, Dave? You want to do the?
Okay, well, I was telling Todd, I've put the thing up in one PDF file, so I think we'll just plow through if that's okay with everybody.
Okay. Yeah, let's do that. It's easier.
I think it's easier than trying to find the individual files like last time. So
Okay.
it's a little less confusing. So we'll go to the Guam Accountancy Endowment Fund update.
Sorry, Dave.
Oh,
Can I,
go ahead.
Did we need to just confirm anything? We talked before regarding the posting or the announcements of the meeting.
Oh, right. Yes. I have at the very beginning of this package, the actual announcement that we published in the newspaper. Let's see if I can find it here. It's this one here. So this is the notice that was actually published on Thursday, October the 14th. So that's our proof of notice. And then Arlene also posted the notice of the meeting on the Government of Guam Notices website. And then it was published again yesterday's paper or Tuesday's paper, I think, because it's another 48-hour notice. So we are properly noticed in this meeting. So,
and we're doing this as, well, I guess, as evidence to support that it was properly noticed, so that we don't waste our time going through this meeting. Right,
yeah.
Dave? So we'll do that at the beginning of every
correct.
meeting. Okay.
Yeah, we were advised by the AG to do that. So, yeah, we've gotten that act together. So now we understand it. It's going to cost us a little over $300-400 a month to post the meetings in the newspaper, because it actually has to be published. It can't just be online, which is free. So we'll spend about $5,000 a year just posting meeting notices. Anyway, we'll go to the Guam Accountancy Endowment Fund update. I'll just scroll through here real quick. Oops, sorry. Okay, this is the valuation at October the 15th. So you can see that our investment has grown over what we've contributed. We've contributed about $3.5 million now. This is the actual number here. We're at the $3.5 million mark. Well, I should say we've contributed about $3 million. So our ending market value from September 30th to October 15th was from 3.582 to 3.62, so up another 80,000 just in the 2 weeks. So, but as everybody knows, the market's going up and down every day, 300 or 400 points, you know. So, but we're doing fine. This is the Raymond James statement for the end of September, which is the end of our fiscal year. And this is showing that our ending balance is the 3.579 million, or really 3.58 million. Our annualized return since we started in 2015 is 8.56%. and our year to date for 2021 is 7.2%. So we are earning ahead of our planned 6% or our target 6% overall growth. So we've basically earned enough over the last 5 years to cover all of the expenses we've made so far with the program. And to date, I'll just scroll through to the end of this, but to date, the investment management fees for the endowment fund, the $3.5 million, has been 23,000 or 27,000 for the year. Was here 27,000. These expenses here was these are the investment management fees for the year, which is actually the 3/4. So it's not doing too bad. If anybody doesn't have any questions on the investment, this is a recap. We've been talking about the visiting accounting professor program. The Dean Santos at UOG has been communicating with Ray Johnson. So basically, Ray and his wife Marilyn have agreed to come for the spring semester in 2022. So they'll be arriving in January. Our arrangement with them is to reimburse their airfare. We provide them with a 2-bedroom space accommodations, a rental car, $15,000 stipend to Ray for his teaching I think he's going to teach 2 classes, and he's developing one as a capstone course. And then we pay him per diem, but Marilyn's only getting some per diem, but she will also be teaching courses. So that's the agreement at this point. I'm thinking the total cost for the 6 months will probably be somewhere between 80 and 100,000. And I've always essentially budgeted about 100,000 per semester if we had a full-time visiting professor. At this point, Ray's looking at teaching one of an undergraduate auditing course and then an undergraduate advanced course, which is probably going to be the accounting capstone course that he's actually designing right now. He's also going to use the second edition of his published textbook. He's published a textbook. It's an auditing textbook that also includes several updates and chapters on using data analytics and auditing. I think that'll be one of the first courses that's taught with a formal textbook at UOG. So,
Dave,
sure.
Sorry. So did you say that Marilyn won't be receiving compensation? She'll only get per diem, but she'll be teaching.
Right. She's agreed to just accept per diem.
Okay.
You know, what they're recommending to have Marilyn do is the course they've created is a BA 203, which is preparation for accounting professionals, and using Alex, this system. It's an online system that Marilyn uses, and it's kind of like the CPA exam software, where it's intelligent such that the more questions you answer correctly, the harder question you get. And the more you answer wrong, it falls back to determine what level of knowledge you have. So I have some information on that here, which I thought would be interesting. This is Marilyn's explanation of what she does and how she uses it. She said about 20 years ago, she was asked to find an online course to help bring students the knowledge of accounting basics up to the par when they're teaching intermediate courses, because they're in their second or third year of accounting and they've probably forgotten a lot of their basics. So what she's done is she went with 4 of the largest publishers and went through a process of evaluation and discovered this course called Alex. And Alex is I have to try to find the name of it in here again. But it works on building an initial knowledge check. ALEX is an acronym for the name of the software. But what she does is she requires each student to meet with her for an hour and a half, so she explains what it does and how it works and those kind of things. And then they go through the process with the software. And basically, she also has a 1 hour meeting with them, and then she'll monitor and answer questions and keep track of them. But there's a little more information down here that's kind of interesting. Here's Alex. It's assessment and learning in knowledge spaces. So use it to refresh your accounting cycle knowledge. In other words, you take an initial knowledge check, so it kind of determines where you are in the process or in the level. And then you actually go through the process of going through a learning mode. And as you go through the process, you complete the topics. And as you complete the topics, it gets harder and harder, but you can't advance without completing the topics. So she's used it for many years now in, I think, Portland University, and she swears by it. It's done a heck of a job in getting the kids that were kind of borderline going into their junior year or even their sophomore year sometimes, getting them back up to speed with the basics so that they don't have a problem with their last 2 years in accounting. So that's basically what she's planning to use, and the dean has set up the process such that she can use this because we've had this ongoing debate at the UOG and the faculty committee that the dean put together. And they've been using different tests to test the candidates going into intermediate accounting in their junior year, and 9 times out of 10 they wind up with a 20 to 30% pass rate, which means they've got a handful of students that don't pass it, and so they're telling them, well, if you don't pass this, you can't be in accounting. And I'm maintaining that that's always never really made a whole lot of sense to me, because we want accountants, but you're telling them because they can't pass this test, they can't be in accounting. But there's no review process. And so they've tried over the last few years to create a review process, to create a path such that it gets them up to speed. But a lot of them still have problems with it. And we're thinking that and based on Marilyn's feedback and her experience in using this, it's done wonders for a lot of these kids that were kind of borderline, but need the training, on a one-to-one basis to actually get up to speed, to understand the accounting. So when they get into their junior year, they're able to do well. And like she says here, if you commit the time and you master all 52 of Alex's topics and score on the knowledge check, then basically you're at the level you need to. And anybody who's done that has never had a problem continuing in their upper level accounting process. So this is basically what she's planning to do for the kids here. So I think it'll be good for them, and I think it'll also be a enlightening process for some of our UOG faculty members, because between having Ray and Marilyn here, I mean, they're both very experienced and very capable, and having them here, I think, brings a good bit of outside experience to our faculty here that doesn't get a lot of outside experience from other seasoned professionals. I mean, they go to conferences and things and they pick up stuff, but it's not like spending 6 months with somebody who's been, the head of a department, or the worked on international committees for setting standards and things like Ray has. So I think they'll bring I think they have a lot to offer to our faculty and our students. just in terms of experience and I guess mentoring process. So anyway, that's basically the plan for the visiting professorship. We're in the process now of settling some of the logistics in terms of trying to find a place for them to stay, things like that. So, but we're working with Katrina, the Endowment Fund, and her staff are working on the logistics. So that's where we are with the visiting professor process at this point. It seems to be moving along okay. Are there any questions on that?
Seems strange that it sounds like this program that what's her name was going to do.
Maryland, yeah.
Maryland, yeah. But what that Maryland is going to do is really valuable, and maybe she ought to be compensated.
Well, we asked.
Hold on, Todd.
But
Yeah.
well, she's getting the standard government per diem, which is not small. So she's getting enough. But she basically said, I don't need to get paid. I mean, she and Ray both are essentially retired from teaching, on a regular basis. And I know for a fact that they created an endowment fund in Ray's name at Portland. So I think they're just doing. I think from Maryland's point of view, she's just doing what she likes to do.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so, yeah, we've met her. She's very nice lady.
Yeah.
I just hope they find a nice place for them to stay. Otherwise she'll probably demand to be compensated.
Well, we're working on it. I talked to Tony Godwin, who's a good friend of mine from years. I've known Tony since he was in high school, and he and Katrina said that they usually work with Sandy Yao from, and she works with Tony. So we told him we're looking for a place somewhere in Tumon that's maybe on the water, maybe not. It depends on what's available, but it'll probably cost us somewhere around $3,000 a month, but to get a 1 or a 2 bedroom place. And I did talk to Ray in Maryland, and I think they said they were willing to go for a 1 bedroom if it was actually on the water. So, they could just walk out, but they were really looking for 2 bedroom because, they both work pretty much all the time like most of us do. So they'd have space. So. But yeah, we're looking for a good place in somewhere in Tumon so that when they're not on campus, they're not out in the middle of nowhere. So, so we're going to do our best to make them happy. We'll have a car, and we're going to also provide a cell phone or a SIM card, whatever they want. So in that sense, I think we're set up to do a pretty good job at this point. So. The one thing we have determined is wherever they go, they won't have a swimming pool. So don't want any more swimming pool problems like we had before. So any other questions?
Dave, I assume they're both vaccinated?
Yes, they are.
Okay.
And they're kind of, they all feel the same way we do. As long as you're fully vaccinated and you follow the protocols, we should be okay. I mean, so yeah. Okay, any other questions? Good. Okay, we can move on to the new licensee reimbursement policy, which I had a discussion with Joe McDonald about the legal ins and outs of this, and Joe has some comments. So I drafted up a basic policy, and so this is the draft I have after reading what Joe's comments were. So this is a policy designed to incentivize Guam resident University of Guam alumni with accounting degrees to become Guam licensed CPAs in support of our local business community. So Joe says that we're okay with specifying that they're University of Guam alum if we want to. We don't have to. The Guam resident requirement is not a problem. We just have to define what we consider residency. So, in the past, we offered other stuff that didn't work. So this is our new policy. So we're saying any Guam resident holding a bachelor's or higher degree with a major in accounting from an accredited institution of higher learning acceptable to the board. And that belays the requirement for UOG alumni. You're not required to have gone to University of Guam. So any other student that is a Guam resident who's gone off to school and come back with an accounting degree and is indeed a Guam resident, then they would qualify. So who sits for and passes the uniform CPA exam, and you have to sit as a Guam candidate. So in other words, you couldn't sit in the States as a California candidate and then pass and then transfer your stuff to Guam. You have to be a Guam candidate who qualifies for, applies for, and is issued a Guam CPA license is eligible for reimbursement to defray the cost of licensure based upon proof of Guam residency, degree status, issued license in good standing, and submit receipts for the licensure related expenses. And those expenses would be, the cost of the license, the cost of your CPA exam fees, and, potentially your preparation courses. So, and we're limiting it to $1,500. So the $1,500 basically would cover all the cost of the exam fees, considering your application and your testing cost is roughly 900 or so at this point, maybe 900, a little over to 1,000. And then your application for licensure is 225, I think. So by the time you cover the exam fees and the licensing fees, you have maybe a few $100s left to cover books or studies. So I think the $1,500 is a viable amount to use. And the procedure means they have to complete the application, detail the residency, education, experience grades, and their costs. And then we'll review it. And once the board reviews it, we'll submit it to the board for approval. And then we can actually write them a check for reimbursement. The key here is that not only have they graduated with an accounting degree and returned to be Guam residents or continued to be Guam residents, but they have actually become a Guam licensed CPA. So they don't actually qualify until their Guam license is issued. So they have to be qualified to be a Guam licensee. So, and that's
Dave?
really what we're after, is creating Guam CPAs, right?
Dave,
Sure, John.
we talked about this. Do we need to distinguish between active and inactive, or it doesn't matter? The license.
I'm not sure it matters, but we can say active. I mean, I would prefer to say active, because that means they're qualified to practice. Because inactive is not qualified to practice. So I would prefer to say active, but I have kind of left that up to, question at this point. So we can easily require a active status licensee.
So I understood McDonald to say that we need to go through the AAA. Did I read that correctly?
Well, part of what he's saying is that we would need to do that to change our rules and that kind of stuff. But I don't think we need to do that in terms of this policy per se, unless we want to write it into the rules. So, but he's saying we could do it through AAA, and we can do all of our rule changes that might be necessary through a AAA if we wanted to. I have to read that again, but we discussed the thing about citizenship and this and that, and he said that gets into some issues that we don't want to deal with. So, because there's some issues surrounding, how you prove it, and who's a citizen, who's not. Are you discriminating things? So, but this is kind of where we're at this point. Let's see. He's saying if we want to, he said we could go through the AAA process, but I explained to him that the way we've operated, I guess, with respect to the expenditures, I'm not sure we need to actually go through the AAA process. He was talking about charging or providing fees and stuff, but and this is why he's saying if we're going to change how we handle the fees it charges, we should do it through the AAA. But with the funds we want to spend, all fees and monies collected are accounted for and deposited, and basically says we can spend it for anything relative to advancing the education or profession of accounting in Guam. So I don't think we need to do the AAA thing in terms of actually paying out the incentive. But he's saying that it's good that if we did it, so it would comport with the act. But I don't know. I have to talk to him about that again. Reimbursing Guam resident licensees, but non-resident will be scrutinized to require the program closely related to advancement of a substantial Guam interest. And that's why we require them to actually be Guam licensed CPAs. And I think, John, you're right. It would need to be, it would preferably be active status licensees, because they would be authorized to practice, where an inactive licensee would not. So.
Yep. Okay, so what would be the next steps then for this, Dave, to get it, I guess, finalized? And because I think we may have a few people waiting for their reimbursement.
I think we have two. Well, we have one that we have two, I think, that have actually become licensees in the last year. So we had one that graduated UOG and passed the exam, but he hadn't actually been licensed yet. So we had to wait till he gets his license. So.
Okay.
But yeah, I can formalize this and then have Joe review it just to be sure we've touched all the bases, and then I can talk to him again about what he really means about comporting with the act through the AAA process. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but I have to ask him again about that. But then if we have to do that, then we'd have to submit, like a rule change thing or something like that. But there are some other things we need to do in terms of changing our rules relative to somewhat relative to other things we have that need to be updated. So if we were going to make a rule change, I think it might be easier in the long run to just write it up as an amendment to the law and ask the senators to pass it, and then it'd get done a lot faster. Because as you know, rule changes now have to go to the AG's office, and then we have to go through the process of going to the governor's office. So they determined that the policy is not detrimental, and that took a long time. Then it has to go to the legislature and have a public hearing at the legislature, which adds another 2 or 3 months to the process. So we could probably get any rule changes we needed to make passed as an amendment to the law faster than we could actually make a rule change through the AAA nowadays. Anyway, so I guess all I need to know is if that's what the board wants to do, we can move ahead with that.
I think we should, Dave.
Yeah,
It's
Okay.
fine with me.
Active, I think active is essential.
Okay. So I'll draft it up with that in mind, and then I'll submit it to Joe for his approval in terms of from a legal standpoint. And then I'll figure out whether we need to do this AAA process or whatever else we need to do if we can just pass it as a board policy. I'm not sure I understand why we need to have a AAA approval of a policy, but I'll find out. I'm not sure what he meant by that. And then I'll have that available for the next meeting. Okay. Okay, the next thing we need to do is request for approval. We've got a bunch of pages of these guys. I don't know if anybody's taken a look, but we don't have any issues with any of them. But I've got, let me see if I can scroll through. Yep. There's one or two people from Guam here. This is Ms. Zhang. I think she works for Deloitte. So she's becoming active on a test. Yeah, and then
Someone from E&Y, I think.
yeah, there's one more here. Yeah,
There's
Taeyong.
one for me.
Yeah.
Taeyong.
Taeyong is becoming active at test. So
Move to approve.
okay,
Second.
Second by Todd. Okay,
yeah, that's
thank
good.
you.
Okay, I appreciate that. So that's another 100 licenses.
Yeah.
The girls went at it again, you know. So 100, what is it? 112, I think. Yeah, another 112 licenses. Okay, so these are requests for extensions that we want to look at, and fortunately, we can strike off the first one, Miss Rajawat, because she emailed us and said she was lucky and she passed all the rest of her parts. So
Lucky.
she got in under the wire. So because her credit was going to expire on September 30, so she passed all her parts in the beginning of September. So she made it. So now she doesn't need an extension. The second one here, there's a lot of other information down here about these guys, but this guy is persisting eye problems from surgery. And he submitted a lot of his information. We granted him extensions back in July and up to December 30, but he's had a lot of problems with his eye and hasn't been able to read very well. So he had to go back for more stuff on his to the doctor. So he's asking to go from December to February 15th. So I don't think I think that's fine. 2.5 months. It's not going to make a whole lot of difference at this point. This was his far credit, so he's either going to pass or not by then, and that'll be it. So Miss Shinoy was diagnosed with a lid infection in her right eye and was advised to rest. So, but her notice to test expired in October, right about the time she was diagnosed. So she wants to extend until December 30th.
Was that the one that said 5 days? Her doctor said 5 days?
Yep. Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, I have mixed emotions about that. And then Mr. Aurora is having mental health issues because he's getting divorced. So, and I don't know. And he sent in his psychology. He sent in his psychology evaluations and all kinds of stuff. And I don't know. That's the first time we've ever seen this one. But his notice expired in November, and he only wants to extend to December. So I don't really have an issue with this one.
Yeah. It's a
This,
month.
the girl with the eye, it's just hard to tell, I mean, with all the other stuff that's been going on, I'm kind of leaning to just giving them the benefit of the doubt, considering they're only want to go to the end of December, which is, another, 10 weeks. So, surprised it's not that far away.
But
So
Dave,
I'm
when it
kinda-
goes to end of December, sorry, the test is only available until the 10th of December, or has it
No,
expanded for the whole month?
the test is available through the end of the month. Yeah,
Oh, it is, okay.
essentially testing is now on a continuous basis. So there's no dark periods. So, I mean, there's holidays and all, of course, with the test center, but in that sense, there's no limitation in terms of, you can't test for these 3 weeks because
Okay.
we need to update stuff. You can test all the time, essentially. So her problem was the notice to schedule expired. So if we extend that through December, then she has, the 10 weeks to schedule to take her test again. So I don't see any real issue with these. And I'd rather give them the benefit of the doubt the first time, and after that, then we don't have to be any more considerate than is absolutely necessary or that we want to be.
They're not asking for much, actually. It's ranges from a month to
yeah.
2.5 months.
Okay.
Yeah.
Move to approve.
Yeah.
Seconded.
Second by Jenny.
Okay.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Tolling.
Okay, thank
So
you.
these extensions are approved. Thanks.
Okay, so we can move that. Then we can run down to page 92. Just a good ways down here. Hope I'm not making anybody dizzy here.
A little.
Just close your eyes till I get there. Almost there. It's this or do the share in, share out stuff, which is okay. This was the candidate care concerns report for April to June. So basically, the only thing I wanted to note here is that out of 248 problems, 114 of them, or almost half of them, are technical software or hardware issues. And the other biggest bunch is the candidate error, the 66. So they still don't have any real explanation for what the hardware software errors are. The only thing I continue to see is that examples of issues are exam won't launch, computer tools not working properly, exam shutting down, unable to restart, or issues with authoritative literature, meaning trying to look up stuff. And even though I sit on the CBT admin committee and this comes up from time to time, we still haven't gotten any definitive answer as to what the actual software hardware issues are. They still seem to be investigating that from time to time. So, but that's basically the biggest issue at this point. Hopefully some of that will be ironed out with the next version of the exam that comes out in 2024 because they are revamping some of the software itself. So move on to the board of director meeting highlights. This was a discussion that Carlos Barrera, is the new chair, was discussing the decision by the PCAOB to create standard setting advisory group to further enhance stakeholder engagement and provide advice. I attended the AICPA council meeting the last 2 nights or mornings, whatever you want to call it, from like 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. And one of the points that they were making was that the new administration that came in, the Biden administration came in and essentially replaced the entire PCAOB board, except with the exception of one person. So there's a lot of change going on there. So apparently NASBA wants to create an advisory group to enhance the processes of dealing with the PCAOB and SEC and some of the other stuff. Hunter Cook's the AICPA Oversight Task Force, and Bradshaw. These are appointments to the Accounting and Review Services Committee, AICPA Oversight Task Force, and the Professional Ethics Executive Committee was Dan Vukovic. So these are just the NASBA people who have been appointed to these committees, which is good. We're getting more representation from NASBA and some of the national committees. They held a NASBA AICPA Leadership Summit in February and talked about the Evolution Initiative, remote testing, and review of federal and state legislative proposals and organizational updates. The remote testing thing has kind of been put on the back burner at this point, so it's not really under consideration. They had a number of security issues that had yet to be resolved, and so I think they just kind of put the whole thing on the back burner until that comes to some kind of fruition. But I think they're having a hard time with the actual security. So Colleen Conrad was doing outreach with various organizations, including AICPA Leadership, International Accreditation Council for Business Education, the federal government regulators, in a joint meeting of the North Carolina Board of Examiners and the CPA Association. NASBA's increased relevance within international standard setters, with meetings between the International Ethics Standards Board for Accountants and representatives of NASBA's Regulatory Response and Ethics Committee discussed the IESBA exposure draft on the public interest entities. So they're getting involved, but I'm not sure how much effect it's had at this point. Then Ken Bishop and he and Barry Melanson were making efforts to allow U.S. licensed CPAs to more easily become chartered accountants and gain practice rights in the UK. And that's the IECSB or something. I forget. It's the England, Wales, and Scotland group of chartered accountants. And just not this morning, yesterday morning, Barry was saying in the AICPA council meeting that they're negotiating to get the practice rights in the United Kingdom to include audit rights. So he said it's slow, but they're making some progress. So they hope to have some kind of agreement hammered out so that U.S. CPAs can gain practice rights. Hopefully by the early next year, I guess, was what they were looking at. Said they've had some issues, but they're beginning to make progress. So. And they've been working on the draft strategic plan that they presented at the July Board of Directors meeting. So, Prometric test centers in Israel and Saudi Arabia are now available for CPA candidates. They're testing in Israel and Saudi Arabia. And one of the updates that Carlos did this morning at the council meeting was to say that the testing in India has started up a few months ago, 6 months ago maybe, and they've already tested 2,500 candidates in India alone. So they're beginning to grow some international testing. So the legislative front, the bills focusing on criminal convictions and universal licensure have been introduced. There's been over 200 and some odd bills introduced this year so far around the United States relative to the universal licensing and essentially doing away with a lot of the licensing, occupational licensing requirements, making it easier. They're maintaining that there's a group that's maintaining that there are barriers to entry to all these professions. We've heard about this before, but so far they've made some progress, and between the AICPA and NASBA and a couple other groups that are members of the is it ARLB or ARIL? It's a licensing group that they put together to actually combat these bills. They've made some progress in making the sponsors of some of these bills understand that doing away with all licensing is not smart. And that actually they've been able to show some study, a recent study that shows that professional licensing in a lot of ways enhances the career opportunities of the people that become licensed versus being a barrier to entry, especially with CPAs. So the Center for the Public Trust has more than 4,000 students enrolled in the Ethical Leadership Certification Program this year. So it's making some progress. We do now supposedly have a chapter of the Center for Public Trust on the University of Guam campus. And I have to follow up with Jason on who's actually leading that effort now. Because Martha got it, not Martha, but Doreen got involved with it. So, and they had a Lead with Integrity leadership series in March with 258 student participants. So in partnership with the Alabama Society of CPAs, they have an online ethics CPE course they've provided to more than 500 licensees. The Center for Public Trust actually has developed some online courses like that. And as you know, many of the states require an ethics course to renew your license every couple of years. In addition to CPE, some of them require you to take certain ethics. Like for Florida, I have to take the Florida ethics course, which actually is not an ethics course. It's more relative to Florida rules and regulations, but they call it the ethics course. But the CPT has actually produced some online ethics courses that we could potentially pursue offering some of that if we were interested. Or if we wanted to. There are some jurisdictions that require you to pass an ethics course prior to licensure. So I don't know if anybody wants to consider that as part of our licensing requirements, but it's possibility. So just so you know. Okay, moving on. The financially, yeah, John.
No, we'll have to take a look at that.
Yeah, it's something to think about. I mean, we could do it. There are a few jurisdictions that do it, but I'm not sure how many. There are some that just require, proof of ethics courses for licensure, and we have that in our law now with the education requires ethics, either as a discrete course or embedded within some of the other courses. So. Through February, the operating excess of 4.1 million with NASBA was 3 million better than last year, and 4 million better than budget. So they saved a lot of money by doing virtual stuff. So their investment income was positive with 5 million. So they have a net asset increase of 9 million bucks. So NASBA's not doing too bad. They did get a PPP loan for 1.9 million. The audit committee was discussing the meaning of the phrase administrative and operational controls in the charter, and they summarized the process followed by the committee that results in proposed change to better define the Section 10 and move that the board of directors approve a change as presented. So we'll have to see how that comes out in the annual meeting, which is coming up in 2 weeks. they're supposed to provide the changes to the charters and bylaws. So I'm not sure exactly what it is, but we'll see. The Education Committee awarded a $10,000 grant to a project to determine, do the program curriculum, faculty characteristics, and support association at minority serving institutions contribute to achieving CPA certification. That's a mouthful, so I'm not sure how that's going to go over, but if we had to answer the question, does our UOG's curriculum, faculty characteristics, and support associations contribute to achieving CPA certification for our minority students? I'd have to say yes, because I think in some sense of the word, they're almost all minority students, as are half the faculty in half the island. So, you know, we tend to have an entirely different view of the diversity, equity, and inclusion issues, or is it DIE or DEI? I'm not sure. Than a lot of the stateside areas, because we have a lot of diversity in our island here. The Bylaws Committee notes areas of inconsistency identified by the review, including the use of term association and NASBA. So they're going to bring that up. They voted on it and amendment in the July board meeting, and I'm sure that'll come up again in the annual meeting. And then they added a session on accreditation to the regional meeting, but I'm trying to remember that, but it didn't go over so well, I guess. Executive Director Committee, we had more information on CPA evolution, the Uniform CPA exam, and anti-ARPL and anti-regulation. ARPL is the acronym I was thinking about. That's the organization for professional licensing. With accreditation was a topic where a lot of the executive directors were saying that they need more information. There's a lot of questions surrounding accreditation with the recent changes that were made. I say recent, you know, a year, 2 years ago, about, you know, the accounting, what is it, ACESB, whichever organization it is that does the accounting school accreditations that used to be part of the overall process and then separated itself out as its own accreditation agency now. So ACESB, I think, is something like that. So there's a lot of issues, and then there's things popping up on transcripts in schools that people are discovering that don't necessarily seem equitable, where you have a course that can be listed on a transcript as a upper level bachelor's degree course, and then also on another transcript as a master's degree course. So there's some questions about stuff like that. And then the executive director has established a mentorship program because there's been such turnover among executive directors. There's 20 something new executive directors within the last 18 months. So it's almost half. So, and then state society executives from the actual state societies, like the versus the boards, participated through the entire executive director conference except for our executive session. So it's been good that with the executive director conferences, we've had the executive directors from the state societies participating. We get pretty good participation, and it seems to have made for a much more harmonious working relationship with the state societies when things come up that we want to address, especially with legislation. And it's not so much an issue with us as it is with a lot of the states, where the board of accountancy members are not allowed to go to the legislature and lobby for any kind of issue they want to address when legislation comes up, because they consider it some kind of illegal process. So when that happens in some of these states that outlaw the board people talking about it to the legislatures, then the society steps in and kind of handles that side of it. And it seems to have helped in some instances to prevent some really bad legislation going through. Again, the diversity committee has been contacting all new boards and, inviting them to come. And, I get the diversity stuff. And then when I give them the membership and the ethnicity of our board and our staff, then they just leave me alone. They don't like to talk too much about it after that. So I guess we're plenty enough diversified. So remote testing again was supposed to be only as emergency, and as I know now, it's been put on the back burner, so we can forget that. Evolution is still going on. They have a risk assessment and mitigation strategy discussed, and they're talking about how to drive the candidate pipeline. And they're, with the change in the exam and the evolution of the licensing, they're hoping that some of this will make a difference in the pipeline. But the downward drivers have been coming. And just at the council meeting this morning, they were saying that university enrollment for this year, for the September year, beginning September, was down nationwide over 700,000 students. So that's 700,000 students less to register this year than they had last year, which means basically just the overall student population is declining, and our candidates are declining with them. They have gap year students, non-competitive entry-level salaries, a broader array of business degrees, a decrease in college age population. There's some factors, work-life balance. Although work-life balance doesn't seem to be so much of a factor anymore, given the pandemic onslaught of remote working and all those things. But they're still working on how to beef up the pipeline. Proposed policy for transition of conditional credit on the exam will be exposed, and the CBT went through this in May and June, and they're going to bring that up at the annual meeting. The issue is that because the current exam has a BEC section, and the revised exam that'll start in 2024 will not. It'll be a discipline instead of BEC. How do you transfer credit for people who have BEC credit but haven't passed the other part, and where they stand? So basically the process is designed to consider if you started under the old version and you have BEC credit and you still need to pass one of the other core disciplines, then fine, your BEC is accepted as if it was a discipline once the new exam launches. So they don't want to leave anybody out in the cold in that sense. No CLARA and their staff augmentation projects, NASBA volunteers resulted in significant enhancements to the original proposal. So they made comments and some of that got changed. So that was progress. This is the July board meetings, the virtual meetings. Basically, the proposed bylaw changes were to add search committee guidelines, section on the interim president, another section on regional meetings, clarify the requirements of nominating committee members. So the committee voted it on making all the changes, and they're going to bring it up on the annual meeting in a couple of weeks. So we'll see all of that. Mark Harris from Louisiana was awarded the recipient for the Rensselaer Public Service Award. Barbara Lay is going to be the Distinguished Service Award, and Randy from Oklahoma is the Executive Director's Award. So they're all good people. Ken says that 82.9% of the NASBA staff has been vaccinated. So travel restrictions were removed, but they're still not having face-to-face meetings. Most everything is still virtual with NASBA. and most of the staff, I think, well, a lot of the staff, NASWA staff is still working virtually from home, not going to the office. The update of the CPA Evolution Initiative included the release of the CPA Evolution Model Curriculum and an AICPA high-level survey requesting feedback on the practice analysis content areas. That survey they went through, the transition policy was shared with the boards of accountancy and discussed during the regional meetings. The survey basically came off saying that there were a few outliers that said we need to fix this, this, and this, but for the most part, I think over 70-something% of the responses were favorable to the curriculum launch. And basically, when it was gone through in detail, I sat through that, and everybody pretty much agreed, with very minor exceptions, that they were pretty well on target. The virtual regional meeting had 440 individuals from 53 of the 55 jurisdictions, which is actually better coverage than they get from a real meeting face-to-face. Colleen provided an update on modernization of the gateway system that's required to implement the CPA evolution licensure model. The updates that need to be made include a lot of the data that's tracked in the gateway, because you're going to have 3 core sections and then 3 disciplinary sections or disciplines, which means you have to track now 6 or 4 grades per candidate, but possibly more than 4, because if you take one discipline and don't pass it, they can take a different discipline and pass that. So you'd have, basically 5 grades for a candidate. So they're going to have to make a number of IT changes just to handle the database and the gateway itself. So they're starting to talk about that. NASWA's working on the gateway changes even now. Hawaii began the process of joining the accounting licensee database. Well, they'll be the final jurisdiction. They're the only ones that do not report their licensing data to the ALD at this point. So Bishop discussed ways to track the impact the pipeline initiatives have on candidate volume, and I'm not sure they've gotten a real handle on that yet. The Alliance for Responsible Professional Licensure, which is ARPL, partnered with a multi-state associates to provide direct access to a number of think tanks regarding occupational licensing model policies. So, and that's relative to combating some of these kind of horrible laws that come up. One of the things that was brought up on that in one of the sessions I attended was one of the NASBA committee people had talked to a legislature in their jurisdiction that had introduced one of these laws to do away with licensing, a lot of the licensing. And when they asked, what was behind it, he said, well, he had a constituent that came up with it and said they should introduce it and pass it because it's a good thing. And said, well, how do you feel about it? And the legislator said, well, I don't really know. I don't really care. But the guy asked me to introduce it, so I just figured I'll introduce it and let you guys fight it out. That's the attitude. So, with that kind of thought process behind the legislation that gets introduced, you got to wonder sometimes. Center for the Public Trust, there's 49 chapters now with over 4,200 students enrolled. So diversity committee activities include working on outreach with historically black colleges, universities, speaking with student organizations, and completing new Board of Accountancy member calls. So I don't know if you ever got any calls, but they probably don't consider you that new since you were on the board before. So rather than send out focus questions, which they've been doing for a long time, the committee instead decided to share questions with the board president, chairs, and the directors on the regional calls. So they actually just shared the question information during those meetings, where I think with every meeting, we always have they have a meeting of the presidents, and then they have a meeting of the executive directors, like a breakfast meeting to discuss things. So that's where the focus questions have gone to. 11 new executive directors were appointed since October 20, with one additional vacancy, and the mentorship program was launched in August 1st. And there are a number of acting directors, and fortunately for some jurisdictions, the acting directors are the staff that has been there for quite a while. So the CBT admin committee likes to work with the Board of Accountancy on a uniform policy for notices. This was discussed in my last CBT admin committee meeting, and what we want to do is try to get some uniformity in the notices to schedule, because a big chunk of them are like ours, they're just 6 months. But there are some jurisdictions that shorten it to 90 days, and others that have increased it to a year. Excuse me. So they're open to get to a point where they have more uniformity. So when you look at notices to schedule, they'll all be set for a uniform period of time, and we don't have to worry about somebody going to one jurisdiction because he gets a year and the other one only has to get 6 months and has to pay twice. You know, these kind of arguments. Moving along, this was the BOE call, Board of Examiners call, and this is just the information that Barry and Mike share from the CPA chair of the Board of Examiners from the CPA exam. I'll get to the highlights down here. The impact of COVID-19 on the CPA exam and financials. The domestic sections. You're looking at the forecast total for 2021 was 156,000. They had budgeted 180,000, so they're down that far. And you know, of 24,000, that's a lot of sections, you know, a lot of money. So for comparison purposes, domestic sections delivered in 2020 were 154,000. In 2021, 5,000 sections have shifted out of the previous domestic test center of Guam into the international market of Japan and Korea. So that 5,000 is worth at $70 a section. It's worth $350,000 to us. And that's basically the test center revenues we have not made for 2021 or fiscal 2021. Prometric centers are open and operating at full capacity, so people can test. Candidates have returned to prior volumes following the change. This has not been the case since 2017, as the pipeline has not recovered since then. So that's basically saying that in 4 years, for the last 4 years, the pipeline still got downward pressure, especially with COVID. We've still got, and I asked Colleen in our last conversation with her to see if she could come up with how many candidates are hanging out in Asia, meaning China, Mongolia, etc., Hong Kong, with extended notices to schedule or extended credits, because we continue to extend credits for our candidates. And several of the jurisdictions in the states, New York, Illinois, Montana, mostly, that have other foreign candidates like we do, are all extending to December 31st, and some now we're even into March of next year, because these candidates in China still cannot test. And I got an email from Pat yesterday, which I have to follow up on, but Pat Hartman was asking, The issue is, can the Chinese actually come to Guam to test? And, we basically have opened up travel to Guam, but there is still an executive order from the Biden administration that says nobody from China can come to the United States. So even though they want to come, and Chinese embassies in China are processing visa and things, there's still restrictions on whether these people in China can actually come to the United States to test, and unfortunately, that seems to include us. So I have to talk to somebody and see if I can figure out whether we can get around that or not. But I know there's pent up demand there. I mean, usually there's at least a couple of thousand sections to be taken by the Chinese in this period of time, and none of them have been able to test anywhere for almost a year now, or over a year in some instances. So with the international administration, so this is the first actual actual detail on international volume I've ever seen them release. The international volumes in 2021 are estimated to be 19,500 sections, which compares favorably by 6,500 sections to 2020 volume of 12,000. If you remember, when we started, we were doing 10,000 sections in the Guam Test Center a long time ago, in 2010 or 11. With the Guam Test Center closed in 20 Q4, 5,000 sections shifted out of the previous test center in Guam to international markets of Japan and South Korea. So essentially, Japan has gone from 61 to 7,900, and South Korea from 1,100 to 4,100. So that's our 3,000 sections from Korea only. Now, Pat and Colleen keep telling me that Korea has a very small test center, which it does. It's only 20 something seats, I guess. But it's always full because the Koreans will go there before they come here, of course. So I think Prometric is probably working on expanding it. So that could ultimately become an issue if we lose all the Koreans. We would still have the Chinese, but that would probably be somewhere around 3,000 sections a year. The exam launched for July 1st, 2021, the exam practice analysis final report and the blueprint were published, and the exam was updated on July 1st, 2021. The changes included business process understanding, digital data-driven mindsets, reliance on SOC reports. They took out IFRS and they removed estate tax. With CPA evolution, the disciplines have been determined to be information systems and controls, which is targeted to assurance and advisory service related to client business processes, information systems, security, governance, and audit, IT audit. The BAR, business analysis and reporting, is assurance and advisory services also, but relative to financial statement analysis and reporting, technical accounting, and financial operations and management. And then the tax compliance and planning discipline is targeted to individual tax compliance and planning, personal financial planning, and entity tax compliance and planning. So those would be the three disciplines that would be available under the new licensure model on the exam. So the exam would still have the core parts, which is the standard FAR and reg and audit, but then you'd have one of these three disciplines to go through. So the research is underway and they're thinking of the content on that. For more than 400 surveys, the average 3.62 for the core sections and 3.46 for disciplines, which was positive on a 4-point scale. That was relative to the curriculum they're looking at from a testing standpoint, or what should be tested where. Concurrent with the content, the exam team was building blueprints, and they're considering their early 2021 survey and focus groups and individuals with experience in SOC engagements and IT audit. So they're trying to involve all of these people in the new process, and also focus groups on impact of technology on the work with tax practice. So overall, scope changes were identified impacting either the location of where content would be assessed, core versus discipline, and the skill that underlies the task represented. They also highlighted relative distribution of skills in the core and discipline sections, particularly the information security and control section, which has a higher concentration at the remembering and understanding skill level. Excuse me. Points were identified, newness of including the newness of the content, that skills are built up from the identified tasks, and that difficulty of items assessed does not necessarily correspond to the skill level. So they're having some issues with that on the stuff that's really essentially new content. But the BOE approved the draft blueprints to use as a basis for the next phase of research, which is confirmation phase, which consists of reviewing the blueprints by CPAs who actively supervise the newly licensed CPAs. And that's what they're asking for people to do now. They're recruiting people for that. They need a couple thousand, I think. So they've sent emails several times. So anybody you know that actually is supervising, newly licensed CPAs would be a good candidate for doing part of this review. I think it's supposed to take 2 hours of time overall for any one person. So that's the volunteer call here. If you're interested, you can complete the survey. But the deadline was October 15, but they're still taking surveys. So. Okay. I think we're almost to the end of this. This was the bylaws amendments that we can read through if you want to. I don't think we need to. It's mostly just procedural stuff. But all the information's here, and then we'll be able to vote on it at the upcoming meeting. But this is in the event of the vacancy. It's mostly procedural type stuff, and I don't think anybody would have any issues with. But it's here for the record. And anybody who needs bedtime reading, for sure. Okay. Let's go to our finances. So I updated the financial this morning because I finally got the number from NASBA for the actual CPACE application revenues in September. It usually comes out sometime after the 20th of the month, sometimes even in the second month following, but I got it this morning from Allison. So I had estimated 11,006 and it turned out to be 12,620. So we were pretty close, but essentially this shows us with 620,000 of revenues for the fiscal year. With our exam application fees up 25% over what we thought we'd have. No test center revenues, so we're down 400,000, essentially 397,000. So, our certification fees were a little short from the 140, and we're blaming that basically on the COVID issues with the lockdowns and the fact that we haven't had any testing. So there's like the 3,000 or 4,000 sections that haven't been given, especially with the Chinese people. But then our individual licensing fees, which is essentially renewals, was up way up even over last year. So we have a retention on a renewal basis that's much better. And our firm licenses, we had a couple of new ones, so we have a little more there. And then it always amazes me that we make this much off of the penalties, and the interest is only a few $1,000s here. And the miscellaneous fees is maybe a couple thousand. So the majority of this, probably 90% of this 54,000 is penalty fees from people basically procrastinating and filing late like I did 2 years ago. So with the 620 in revenues, we were looking at a 707 in expenses, which put us to an 86,000 deficit. But if you take out the 300,000 contribution we made, then essentially, even without the test center revenues, we were able to have an excess of 214,000. So that tells me that we've reached the milestone of being able to fund the board operations without the test center revenues. And that's a good thing, is it came at a good time, because I'm not sure how much we're going to get back until the COVID thing is lifted. And then we do get it back, we may not ever get back the Koreans. So especially if Prometric increases the size of their testing center there in Seoul. Excuse me. Anyway, we've got enough revenue to drive the board, and we've managed to keep our expenses in line. We did come up with I was estimating 18 to 20,000 on the legal fees, and so far we spent the 14,900 on legal fees for the public hearing for the girl who never showed up. So that was excess expenditures, and then the postage is the biggest overrun, and I'm hoping that we can come up with a solution to that by going to electronic means of renewing licenses. We still would have to issue certificates, you know, in a nice format, etc. And we can charge more money to do that if we want, but I'm not sure it's necessary. I think the biggest thing is to bring the renewal process in line with some of the other jurisdictions, where, like, when I renew my Florida license, I get an email that says, here's your license, print it out. So, and I think that the world is coming to that. Most people would, like me, you might print it out and stick it in a file somewhere just in case your computer dies, but otherwise you just email it to your phone or store it on your phone so you have it in case you need it, but you don't really print it anyway. So I'm hoping we can get something done on that within the next 3 to 6 months. That's what I'm working on. But expense-wise, we're good. So essentially, we're at the 400 level with expenses. So if we can keep our expenses somewhere around the 400,000 mark, and we could still raise 600 in revenue, we'll be doing okay. You notice here that we started with a 2 million beginning balance, fund balance, and even if we restrict $1.2 million, which is 3 years of operating expenses, then we still have 820,000 unrestricted. So I think we can make a bigger contribution to the endowment fund this year. So this was our overall performance through September. So we wound up with, and September always decreases a little from August, but by and large, what we're seeing is a return to about the 2018-19 level in terms of applications. These are candidates applying to take the exam as a Guam candidate. That doesn't mean they sit here. They can be anywhere in the world, and most of them are elsewhere. But they are applying as a Guam candidate through CPACE. So we're doing okay in that sense. Then I have the August information here for the record, and that'll get posted on the website, but it's moot at this point. And then this is the result of the Budget Act that got processed. I did have a conversation with some staff members of Senator Joe Estes, who was in charge of the budget. And they gave us the same expense budget appropriation as in past years. And this actually originated from the FY 2019 budget that they've just carried forward over and over again. They've even though we've submitted our new request, it's never been changed. And I don't think they've changed any of these, frankly. I can't tell you why, maybe one or two, but I made the point with his staff that I wanted, and I thought that we should be able to make a bigger contribution to the endowment fund because we have it sitting in the bank accounts. They're the only accounts we can put it in, and it's earning less than a half a point in interest, like a 0.04, 0.02 interest. We can put it in the endowment fund and earn 5, 6, 7, 8%. So the solution they came up with was, rather than giving us additional appropriation in the sense of a current year budget, they added a continuing appropriation authorization, which basically says, notwithstanding any other provision, an unexpended balance of our fund is available, shall not lapse, and shall continue to be available until fully expended. With this clause in the budget law, which is passed and signed and was not signed but lapsed into law, governor didn't sign it, she let it lapse into law. This means that we can essentially take however much of our fund balance that we believe is appropriate and contribute it to the endowment fund. So if we look at September's
Talking
again,
out of 811.
That's relative to how much we wanted to reserve from a restricted standpoint. Because
oh, that's right. We got a lot more than that then.
Yeah, the restricted fund balance calculation of the $1.2 million was based on 3 years of expenditures, meaning at an average of a little over 400,000 a year, right? But I was using that formula because of the fact that in the past, we basically had to have the test center revenues in order to fund the board. We hadn't built up enough of a licensure database that our revenues would cover our expenses. But I think we've reached, in the last year, we've reached a milestone of the point where our licensing activities, meaning exam applications, new licensees, and renewing licensees, our fees have reached a point where they can actually fund the operations of the board without the test center revenues. We've always known that the test center revenues would go away eventually, because if they ever test in China, of course, nobody will come to Guam to test. So that's why I was reserving 3 years worth, which would give us an opportunity to recover if something ever happened in that sense. Well, it's only happened in the sense of COVID, but it's proven that we can operate the board without test center revenues. So I'm thinking that we could take the 1.2 if we wanted to, which would leave us with the 8, which is 2 years worth of expenditures at this point. We could actually make a contribution of $1 million or 1.2 million to the endowment fund. Get the money in there, and that would bring it to a little over 4.5 million level, close to 5 million level. At which point the earnings of the endowment, the earnings of the fund should be able to forever, in perpetuity, fund the visiting professor program, presuming the bottom doesn't fall out of the economy and everything go bust. But if we can get it to the 4.5 to 5 million level, the fund itself would earn enough to cover all of the visiting professor expenses. So that's kind of what I'm recommending in that sense.
I guess it sounds good. I mean, if anything, at least it will make the money we have into more productive assets, earning a lot more.
Absolutely, about 600 times more. Because you can't.
Do you have to get legislative approval to do that? Do we have to stay with appropriation level?
No. According to the explanation I got from the senator's office, and I'll ask Joe McDonald just to verify it, but the explanation they gave me was that with the continuing appropriation provision, we're free to expend the fund balance however we see fit in terms of you know, under the terms of the act, of course, but, you know, in terms of you know, forwarding CPAs in accounting education in Guam. So I don't see that's an issue. I think the continuing appropriation authority gives us the appropriation authority to make that contribution. So that's what I'm thinking. I'll verify it with the legal counsel, and if we can do that, then I'll set up something. And but I guess I'm looking for the board to approve a contribution of at least $1 million in the FY22. Over and above what we had budgeted was well, from our 2019 budget of 300,000.
That looks good. Dave, can you just scroll up? So I just want to see the fees that we're collecting.
Sure.
So total revenue. So it's 620. We might be getting, you're saying, at least on the firm licensing, individual licensing.
Yeah, we're looking
Yeah,
at 400, and without any penalties. I never budget the penalties and interest,
okay.
but without that, we're still looking at over 500,000.
$500,000 at least.
Exam fees, certification, licensing fees, yeah, 500. And I'm reasonably confident we can hold our expenditures to the 400,000 level or so. 400, 410, less than 450. Especially if we can reduce the reduce the postage costs. That's one of the bigger costs. So. The other thing I'm really want to get done, and I've looked into. I talked to the people in Washington because they just did a new online licensing system, and they used a combination of Salesforce and some of their Washington state government stuff. But their cost was in excess of 1.2 million just for the licensing system. So it's Salesforce. So I'm still trying to figure out how we can go to actually having online licensing that would accommodate all of our renewals, you know, so that essentially people can go online and renew themselves. We don't have to go through the paperwork process of, you know, processing their credit card payments and things like that. So hoping to get that done by the end of this fiscal year. That's all I have.
Okay, I think that sounds good, Dave. I mean, so you're asking the board right now if there's want us to make a motion to at least appropriate at least $1 million or contribute $1 million to the
Guam Accountancy Endowment
Guam
Fund.
Accountancy Endowment Fund for
And
FY22.
correct. Yeah.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, great.
Okay.
So
Appreciate
approved.
that.
So just for clarification, Dave,
Okay.
we will contribute at least $1 million in FY22 to the Guam Accounting Endowment Fund.
Correct. Yes. And I'll verify the legality of the process with legal counsel. So, okay. That's basically all I have. Has anybody got any questions about anything else? I will be attending the annual meeting, which is going to take place again, like from 3 a.m. to 7 a.m.
I will try to see if I can attend at least the breakout sessions, but that's 4 a.m. So I'm still debating.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. It's I'm beginning to get used to it by now. So, but yeah. So if there's no other business, then I guess we can adjourn if
That's
you're
it.
ready.
Okay, how about here move? Is there a second?
Second.
All right, thank you,
Okay.
Tommy. So meeting adjourned.
Meeting adjourned. Okay, I'm going to stop
See you
recording.
next month or sooner.
Okay. Yeah, it'll be, the next month would be in November, but I have to take a look, quick look at the calendar.
Okay.
I'm not sure what, let me see if I have it here.
That's Thanksgiving.
18.
Yeah, it would be the 18th. The third Thursday would be the 18th, the week before Thanksgiving. So,
That's good. Good day.
I think we can do that. We probably won't have much to consider other than the licensing. So, I mean, the new licenses. So, okay.
All right. Okay.
Thank
Good.
you.
That's it. Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.